what is the material. What is the material that we're talking about? I think we know in this case it's herbarium specimens, which I would argue has a lot of advantages to other kinds of material. These are sort of ledger book type things. They can be very problematic. You might have a pinned specimen where you don't see the specimen. I think with herbarium, you might have something like this where you have different orientations to the label, different maybe the critters in the picture, and so on and so forth. But for us, mostly focus on these flat sheets, and which allows us to kind of present the image as is and zoom into the label and see where other labels might occur. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the very basics of the kind of metadata that we often collect, at the time of imaging or the time of initial data capture. And these things kind of sound trivial, but they're becoming really important as we kind of move forward with these sorts of methods and especially with more automated methods. Things like, is it handwritten or typewritten? That can make a big difference with sort of how we treat the label, how people interact with it. We have some automated ways to detect that. Also, things like what language is it in? That might sound silly, right? Because most of our stuff's in English. But again, when we start talking about what we're trying to do and what we want certain kinds of language detection or who we want to work on these specimens, the language becomes really important. And so if you might know that all of your stuff is in English, in which case that encoding that metadata into the record is quite straightforward, right? Versus someone who might have 10 different languages or different types of characters and those sorts of things. Also, the distinction between scientific information and management information. Generally speaking, these volunteers are most interested in science information. They're most interested in helping us with things they perceive to be more interesting and more widely applicable. Things like dates, the taxonomic name of something. Maybe they're really interested in Tennessee, and so they're interested in the locations and the places that these things were collected. Management information can be really important to us, but it tends to be kind of boring to other people. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and collect it if we need it, but just these are things I like to remind people, like having people digitize catalog numbers. They generally don't find that to be particularly exciting, though if you need that and it's important, then we got to get it. But generally, you can motivate people a lot more by explaining why a date's important or why this specific taxon is important to them. I think I'll actually just skip over this one. We've talked all about a lot of this stuff already. And so, this gets into questions about how do we want them to enter the information. We generally focus at Notes from Nature on verbatim. So just enter. So for example, if we're doing the transcription of something, just enter it as is. However, there's a really strong argument that says that humans are really good at interpretation. Computers aren't really. And so why not have humans do interpretation of things? And so there's kind of an argument to be made either way. But generally, we focus on verbatim types of things. Now, something like, if, ST occurs on the label, right? Many of us might think, oh, that's probably short for street, or maybe that's Saint something, in a place name or a parish name or something like that. But, not everyone may see it that way, and they may enter it differently. And since we collect multiple entries actually it's not per record, it's per field, then, we want them to make sure they're going to interpret the same way. If someone thinks that county is CO, is Colorado, and the other person thinks it's county, and someone else thinks it's company, now we've got a problem, right? We got to go in and look at this record. So generally, people are pretty happy with just enter it the way it appears. But it's something to think about, and you often can use humans to solve problems that you may have. So it's just something we want to be sort of mindful and thoughtful about. So this is just an example, right? This is very familiar to most people here, but things like MI, period, right? 2.2 miles. East. So this is all kind of intuitive to us, but imagine if you're from a different place or you speak a different language or you're used to kilometers or something like that. These things can be different, or maybe you're not familiar with township range and section, but so you may misinterpret this as meaning something else. So lots of, lots of these kinds of things on our labels. And then you get into things like, how is the elevation entered, right? So in Darwin Core, we want the elevation to basically be in meters. So we sort of standardize it to an international standard, if you will. Most of our stuff's in feet. So then, do you want them to enter it and you just do a simple conversion? Or do you want them to actually, do it in the sort of standard Darwin Core standard way? So those are some kind of general considerations for doing transcription in general and working with people that may not always be familiar with our stuff. So now I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Notes from Nature. So Notes from Nature is sort of this clearinghouse. We've become kind of like, we host multiple different kinds of projects. So we're like an umbrella, and then we have these different projects within, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but each one of these, you can click on it. They have their own pages, their own branding, and then they might have multiple expeditions running at a time. We've been using this Southeastern US Biodiversity has been kind of our CERNAC project. And that's something that we already have built and available to this community to utilize. And I'll revisit that in a few minutes. But, we first launched Notes from Nature in 2013. I mentioned we're on the Zooniverse, which is a sort of a very large, community science platform that started with astronomy. And so we've been on there for quite some time, and we're getting close to 5.5 million transcriptions on the site. And we've done many kinds of specimens. Now, definitely predominantly it has been herbarium and pinned insects for probably obvious reasons, which is we have the most images of those, and we have lots of those in our museums. But we've done all kinds of things, wet collections and all things like that. And so a little bit about sort of the terminology I'm going to use. A data provider is like you. That's like the person that's saying, hey, I got these images and I want them, I want some measurements of the leaves, or I want, this certain things transcribed. The campaign is sort of your overall effort to work towards those digitization. And, that can sound a little intimidating. People are like, whoa, I don't have a whole campaign. I just have like 5 expeditions I want to do. Well, I just encourage you to think about it in that framework, because it helps to kind of organize things. It helps us to do some goal setting, to think about how long it might take, who might be interested in this stuff. So I still like to think of it as a campaign to sort of meet your goals, so that we know kind of what you're after and make sure you get everything you need. And then again, those expeditions are like the specific set of tasks that we're asking these volunteers to do on these images. I want locality, habitat, and date. And that's what I want for these sets of specimens. That's what we would call an expedition. And so, components of the campaign are sort of these sort of 5 high-level things, like an outreach plan. That could be as simple as, hey, I have access to, a group of people in South Carolina. I'm going to post it on Facebook and ask them to help. That might be your plan for outreach. Or, hey, I got a newsletter at my museum. I'm going to send it out next month. So the outreach plan could be as simple as, I'm going to do a couple posts, or I'm going to do a little bit of outreach to some groups that I think might be interested in this. Of course, we need your images. So without images, we can't really do this work. This is based on the idea that you already have images taken. Your target data elements, like I said, that could be, whatever number of fields or specific things that you want people to enter on those specimens. Help text is kind of how we describe how to do that. So like I said, even though our volunteers tend to be very savvy, we like to tell them, this is what a date is, this is where you'll find it, this is how it'll be formatted. And that can be very simple. And then, of course, the data analysis that you plan to do, or whatever it's going to take to get this thing into shape for your use at the end. If the data doesn't come back how you want it, then we've kind of defeated the whole purpose. But in terms of the flow chart, I'd just like to point out that a lot of this stuff, like the outreach, interacting with volunteers and some of that stuff, that can go directly from you to the public. Like, we have social media and we have those things, but we always encourage you to, reach out to your groups, your constituencies. Often your museum has a much greater reach than Notes from Nature does, or than the Zooniverse does. And then the data provider, what you're providing us. So a lot of times this is just the images. Somebody says, hey, I got these images. We've already got sort of a template set up for Herbarium to collect these certain target elements. You send it to me, and then we help you. We're the sort of purple part, and then that's what all goes into the to the public. And so the qualities of a successful project, making sure those, like I said, those directions are very concise and simple, a moderate number of tasks. If people sometimes come and say, I want these 30 fields filled out for every specimen. And I say, well, okay, if those are really necessary, maybe we'll split them up into 2 different expeditions or something like that. The general rule is that people will do more specimens if they can finish it in a relatively reasonable amount of time. If every specimen takes 10 minutes, they're probably not going to do, that many, but if they take 2 minutes, they're more likely to do them. So sometimes I'll say, okay, well then let's split them up, or do you really need that field or whatever? Avoid edge cases. We love edge cases. We love, hey, there's this one stray pencil mark occasionally on this specimen and it means this. This is probably not the most effective way to capture something that's on less than 10% of your specimens. We can always try, but I like to try and sort of focus on the things that are going to be most common. Be responsive to questions that volunteers post. Come up with an engaging theme, think of something that would be of interest to them. Obviously, we provide a baseline audience, but we're always asking, for that to see if we can pull in new people. And then, as I said, if you don't get the data you need, then none of this has really been worthwhile. So we have to make sure you're getting the data that's useful to you. This is I like to throw this in because we have a lot of creative and artistic data providers. This is from one of our colleagues at University of Utah who is doing some slides with mites and fleas. And so we thought this was a fun little post for the holidays, wishing you the mightiest of holidays. So some of these kinds of outreach and things can be this simple. Just a little post that says, happy, have a mighty holiday. And hey, if you get a minute, come and digitize a couple of these mites, while you're sitting with family over the holidays. So I like to, not only because some people get a little creeped out by these, but just to point out that sometimes these outreach things are just that simple. One image, a sentence, and a call to action. Hey, come try this out. Come help us out. So I'm actually going to skip over this because a lot of this we already have. For example, we have a number of templates that we can use for Cernex specimens. So I'm going to kind of skip over that part and talk about a few other things here before the time. But I'd like to talk a little bit about QA and QC because a lot of people ask me, well, how good do these volunteers do? Is this quality data? And so I like to say, well, there's 2 ways to think about this, right? So we have QA, which is sort of fine-tuning the process to avoid data issues. And then we have QC, which is like testing the data at the end to discover problems. So, some of this is, like managing for issues. So are we being clear about what we want? Are we asking for something realistic? Are we telling them how we want the data to be entered? And so if we get some sort of messy answers, for example, let's say we ask for elevation and we don't clarify whether you should put the units, then maybe you get half of them are just numbers and half of them are numbers and some text. So did we do a good job of describing that? And so that's kind of on us, right? That we can't necessarily blame the volunteers if we haven't been clear. So I always like to point out that we should go through these and make sure that you're happy with what's, kind of what's being suggested and what you think you're going to get back as far as the data. And then we have some QC steps that are kind of built in to help flag records. So these are basically processed via custom algorithms. So I'm going to try and walk through this example somewhat succinctly here, but the top row with yellow is basically the output that you would get, okay? Each row here labeled 1, 2, 3 are the individual entries by a volunteer, okay? So the first line, these are just like numbers that the system gives it. First column, excuse me. Second column is actually just their username. So you know the username of the person, but that's all you really know unless you know the person or they've told you something. And then we get into the data portion. So in this first one was, what country was this specimen collected in? All three volunteers agreed. It was from Canada. So we got a unanimous match in the answer. In the second one, we asked something like province, state province type question. One person didn't know what to enter, but two people did. They thought it was Ontario. Our algorithm says, well, you know what? 2 out of 3 is good enough. So we're going to give you your final answer is Ontario. Then for the next one, it's sort of like a district or county level question. This one probably didn't have a drop down, so that makes, potential for more errors. One person wasn't sure. One person put district in the name, and one person just wrote the name. So our algorithm says, whoa, there's the 3 different answers. We're going to flag that. Okay. We're not going to give you what we think it is because there's 3 different ones and we don't trust that. Okay. So that's the kind of basic way that this works. And so you get your final output, which is called your reconciled answers, but you also have access to these individual answers as well. And then, we try and tell you where we think issues are, and we have sort of a little kind of summary file that we provide with that to help you kind of see all of that. So let's see about time here. Well, I might have to skip this, but the gist of this is that basically we did a study to compare like simulating a volunteer with Notes from Nature volunteers. And we basically found that when you use one entry, they're pretty darn close to one another. But when you use 3 entries, they're basically not separable. So we basically, your Notes from Nature answers are going to be slightly better if you use 3 untrained versus 1 trained lab technician, was kind of the gist of this study, but they're both very accurate. So we're talking about, a couple of points here. And this is a paper that you can check out. I'm sorry, I'm going through it a little fast, but the basic gist is that, we're trying to show you that how it compares to a technician at your museum that's sort of trained on site versus someone just reading the directions online and entering the data. Okay, so the basic thing I want to convey here before I end is that for a lot of people, the big hurdle is getting a project up. There's content that needs to be made. There's creating templates for the expeditions. That can take quite some time on my part and your part to get all of that. We've already got this for your community. There's already a project up. So that kind of means that if you're happy with the way we're doing things and you're happy with the templates, all you really need to do is send me some images and a name of an expedition, and we can launch that for you. So I just want to emphasize this because I talk to a lot of people who are starting from zero, and it can take 30 or more hours to get to this place. And so we have this CERNAC project. These are 3 of the active expeditions here at the bottom that are currently running on there, but we can add more. We're happy to talk to you and support this, especially if we're talking about a situation where you're pretty happy with the template and we can just kind of get the images up and launch something for you. So I really want to make that point before we end that this community already has a leg up and sort of a conduit into Notes from Nature that hopefully lowers the bar a bit. And of course, I know this is all going fast, and I'm happy to have a quick meeting with people and talk through this stuff because I know you'll have a lot more questions. But I do want to emphasize that that we have this available for people within this consortium. And then we've been working on this sort of automated and semi-automated process to kind of expedite the digitization process for like easier typewritten specimens. This is probably a good topic for a separate talk and for those that are interested. And I'm always happy to set up an hour or something, or if you want to send me a couple sample images and I can show you how it works. But this is a lot of people are working on these sort of AI type things, and we're happy to show you what we've been up to. But I think for in the interest of time, I'll stop there. And I don't know if there's time for questions or what have you. But thank you all so much.
Michael, thank you so much. We have multiple meetings throughout the year, Zoom meetings. If you are willing and people are interested, we can give you a full hour for a consortium meeting to go more in detail. So we're going to talk about that later in the day of potential meeting ideas for the consortium. And I personally think that that would be a great one. So thank you again. We have Lana Burgess from the McKissick Museum coming to talk to us. So
sounds good. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lana Burgess, and I am the interim director of the McKissick Museum and the faculty curator. I was hired in 2008. This is my 16th year starting. John Nelson was on my hiring committee, and at the time, there was a conversation about moving the herbarium to McKissick Museum. Fortunately for the herbarium, that was not the case. I want to thank you all. Again, I don't know that this will be particularly relevant to this group, but I was asked to talk a little bit about sort of the curation crisis that's happening, as we know, at Duke, at other university museums and herbariums. And the name of my talk is meant to be subtly vague, an attempt to dig at the administration at the university, because we are in a current state of extreme crisis. We are in a holding pattern where I don't know the future of McKissick Museum beyond December. So with each new administration at the university, and we've had quite a bit of turnover in the past decade, you know, people come in with new ideas, new leadership have great ideas. And our current dean, Joel Samuels, has decided that the museum is too expensive to continue. So rather than keeping us under the College of Arts and Sciences, he's wanting to move us under the provost of the university, because that is the person who is primarily responsible for the academic side of things. I completely agree and advocate for that. If any of you are familiar, the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries put out a white paper about 5 years ago talking about professional practices and how university museums serve an entire university, not just a unit, not just a college, and that we should be funded under the president or under the provost. Our current challenge is that our provost does not believe in museums. She doesn't know what museums are, and we're having to educate her from the very basics of what is a museum, why do you have a collection? So back in February, I had the opportunity to speak with her and talk about the importance of it, talk about the issue of reaccreditation of museums. Being at an accredited university, we want to be an accredited museum. She's not sure that that is a direction she wants to pursue, and I'm still waiting on a response. But being the optimist that I am trying to be, she came through with $230,000 from her own budget in June to do an inventory of the collection. Wait for it, it sounds wonderful, right? We have over 100,000 objects and specimens that we know of, and we had from June 15th until December to get this finished. So I'm hiring and training students. I'm looking at all the wonderful work that Michael is doing, and I'm thinking, wow, if I just had the time to come up with those protocols and templates, we'd be in much better shape than we are now, and thinking about managing, you know, the end result of the data. But we've got a good team. My hope is that we might be a model for other universities that may have their staff frozen. As we do, we're now a staff of 2. We have no curatorial expertise, except I'm an art historian, and we don't have a very strong art collection. We've lost our curator of natural history. She passed away. And of course, you know, that is the largest collections in the McKissick Museum. So what are we doing? Well, we're using this opportunity as a training ground, right? Instead of hiring professionals, I'm trying to hire students and recent alums of the university to give back, to get the training they need to buy into this experiential learning idea that the university has set forth as one of our quality enhancement plans for accreditation. So we're actually going very well, thanks to the work of Christian Chichi Murray, Herrick Brown, South Carolina Library and the digital libraries. We're in a very good position with our natural history collection. We were able to hire an alum who just got her master's degree in geology back to South Carolina from New Mexico. So I'm much more confident and comfortable now that those collections, which are so important and valuable, will be correctly inventoried and updated and that's really the minor area again, because we've done so much work in that area since 2011. So the goal at the end of this is to hopefully get our lines back, figure out our funding source, and the other challenge is that you may have heard rumors around town that they want to move McKissick Museum out of the McKissick building because it is prime real estate and we need more classrooms and beds. So back to the provost, she would like us to not have any gallery space, just have the inventory done and then just put things away. We've seen some of that done with SKIA. We have seen in some cases that done with the Herbarium for a long time until the work of John and Herrick really have brought it out to the public and put it online. So we're hoping to continue to partner with the museums and the collecting bodies on campus to be able to at least get this inventory pushed out on Past Perfect Online and advocate for being a research institution at a Research One university. So thank you. And this is not a call to action. There may be one coming. So perhaps I will join your listserv and share information, but thank you for the time and please come visit McKissick Museum.
Question?
I'm gonna go for it.
What kind of material do you have? Just sort of a quick list of materials that you have there at the museum.
Sure. So the state of South Carolina bought Thomas Cooper's specimen collection in 1823. So that's our oldest collection. But
What kind of stuff?
gems and minerals. So large gem and mineral collection. We have a large shell collection, some fossils, some bones. The herbarium stuff is over, belonging to the biology department. We, at one point, were approached about stewarding the moth collection at the university, but that has never come to us. And that, as I understand it, is not in any condition that we have any resources to be able to curate it or manage it. We also have a very large collection of material culture, decorative arts, a lot of traditional materials, aquaculture, bateaus, handmade nets, fishing baskets, and of course, sweetgrass baskets, pottery from Edgefield and Catawba mostly, and the southeastern region, North Carolina, and then quilts, political collections, a very robust but unused archive of folk life, traditional cultural makers dating back to the mid-20th century. Just a little bit of everything. And my greatest challenge is trying to convince someone who doesn't want a museum that maybe we should de-accession some of this so that we can prioritize using the collections that are valuable to the university. One of the greatest challenges we faced is things were given to the university from the mid-19th century up to the present day because there wasn't a state museum or another repository. So a lot of it's not museum quality. But the word de-accession is not in her vocabulary, and until we can educate her on it, she's just fearful that it will have some kind of negative impact. It could actually help us focus on those important research and teaching professions. Thank you. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much, Lana. We appreciate you coming and updating us on that. We have online a virtual speaker, Blanka Aguero from Duke. Blanka, are you able to talk and hear us?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Blanka Aguero. I'm a data and collections manager at the Duke University Herbarium, and I'm in charge of the cryptogamic collection. And Sheila asked me to talk to you about what are the news and, what are we gonna do? And I haven't really prepared any presentation, and I'm afraid I don't really have any definitive, news about what's going to happen with the collection, because the communication is really not happening, and information doesn't flow from high to low at all. And as far as I know, the decision still hasn't been made. Maybe before I go into this detail, I would say that we are organized as a facility within the biology department. Duke University does not have any museums or nature history museums, and that is definitely a negative. And we have little over 800,000 specimens, and about 67% more or less have been digitized. So even though our presence online is, I would say, rather clear, that definitely didn't make any change. That didn't help to change the decision that Duke made. We are 3 collections manager taking care of those specimens. We have 5 curators, and of those 4 are retiring in the near future. And so we learned on February 17th that Duke decided no longer to support us and divest the collection. A committee has been organized, which has one representative. One of the curators is on the committee, and that's it. Despite the feedback that the department received from the community and from all of you, thank you so much for being vocal and sharing your opinion. Despite all that, it was very clear from very early on that Duke made the decision, and they are not thinking about changing it. And I would like to assure everyone that the specimens are not going to end up in landfill. We are going to, the specimens will pass on to another institution. We just do not know yet what the institution, what's that institution going to be. And I know for sure that the UNC Botanical Garden director submitted a proposal to Duke, and they would like to adopt the whole collection. I don't know any other collection, any other details, who else is being considered. That's how bad that communication is. And what I have learned through the grapevines is that the strategy is to keep the collection together, which means we are not going to be sending the bryophytes to one place, lichens to another place, vascular plants to a third place. They would prefer to find home for it as a whole, which of course, find a home for 600 cases. And, that's really what I have to say. If any of you have questions, please do ask. I will try to answer, but it seems we are in a situation where everything bad that could happen happened at the same time, and we have not been able to advocate for us in any constructive way since February. And we have been working, if any of you have loans with us, believe me, we are working very hard to return all the loans. The priority number 1 is returning every specimens that are not ours, to their homes. Priority number 2 is going to be then getting our things back. But right now that's, getting specimens home is what needs to happen first. And we are trying to tackle the backlog meanwhile as much as well as we can, because those are the endangered specimens. If we feel like if things are not in cases, they can be lost along the way.
Well,
No good
Blanka,
news on my side.
if there, please let us know if there are action items that South Carolina or SCDNR can do. I don't know, I mean, we'll have to see. Keith?
Yeah, I'm curious, Blanka, you said, I think you said 67% of the collection is digitized. What was the organization strategy there? Say if we looked at southeastern specimens, is it higher than 67% or?
So our lichens have been completely digitized. Our bryophytes, we are about 20,000 to go out of the 280,000 that we have. So almost done. Our algae have been digitized nearly completely without the wet stock. There are errors that need to be cleaned up, which there is no capacity to do that right now. So what's remaining, fungi, the basidiomyces have been completely digitized. What's remaining are the parts of the vascular plants. And so we are part of CERNEC, you know, what was the scope, what was the scope? So I think that right now there are about 190,000 in the database. We need to transcribe a lot of them, and we need to be part of the notes from nature. I think, Michael, I'm going to get in touch with you about that. Yep. And we were part of the pteridophyte grant, so the ferns should be mobilized.
I think you have sadly a shared despondency here in this room, listening to all of this. But if there is anything that, you know, if we can be brought into any, as an agency, we can be brought into any of these conversations to help plan what's happening. We want to be part of those discussions, if it helps at all.
We would love to be part of these discussions as an institution with our administration, and we are not. It's been incredible. And I would say something I wanted to add. I mean, the ideal solution would be if the UNC and Duke collections were combined. We would stay in the area. There is a space that I understand, you know, UNC owns that would be suitable for us. It needs new HVAC system. We are not gonna, I think Duke is not gonna give a penny with the collection. So if there is any expectation. Yes, thank you, Damon. I see your comment. Please, I know all I know is from the meeting that we had back in May.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Blanka's right. We did submit a proposal from the North Carolina Botanical Garden which oversees the NCU herbarium at UNC. And you're probably aware there are almost equivalent size collections, 800,000 specimens each. We have our own problem, and that is we've exceeded the capacity of the NCU collection, which is currently being stored in Coker Hall and is, expanded out into the hallways. And so we actually have plans on the books to build a plant biodiversity research center in the future that would be able to house up to 3 million specimens, but that we haven't even started fundraising for that. That's way down the road. And so when we learned about the Duke Herbarium, we came up with an alternative plan, and that's to combine both collections under one roof with access to scholars from both universities. That proposal, I understand, is being considered by the working committee that Blanka mentioned, along with a couple others. And I'm also working on UNC administration to get their approval for this concept as well. And I've met with the provost, and he's enthusiastic about the idea. So there's lots of hurdles, lots of barriers. It's an old building. There's still a lot to be determined, how expensive it's going to be, who's going to pay for what, all of that. But I'd say that we are very hopeful that these two collections could be combined in some way and stay in North Carolina and stay in the southeastern United States. So there's nothing anyone can do. Actually, if anyone did anything, it might fuck the whole thing up. So just yeah, stay tuned, and you know, when we have news to share, we'll be sure to get it out there.
Well, thank you both so much. And I'm very sorry to hear that. Hopefully, there is a semi-good resolution. Although we would prefer the best resolution for Herbarium to stay together, or just stay in place. But, thank you guys for
Stay at the site. Thank you, Chila, for having me. I would like to say that, yes, I agree that the less publicity right now is probably better, because things have been quite, yeah, let the administration deal with it the best way they can. It's not going to help if we are trying to be too vocal about it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm the curator of the University of North Carolina Chapel Herbarium. I always like to put out there that money helps. If anybody has $100 million and would like a new herbarium named after their cat or their mother,
Wow.
we are willing, Blanka and I are willing to accept your $100 million anytime. So I always like to put that out there.
Carolyn, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you know if, well, is anybody looking at like an NSF rapid opportunity or something like that to help with immediate funding?
NSF, yes, we are.
Like a non-traditional route through NSF that might expedite some funding?
Yeah, and NSF can also help, with like infrastructure things, you know, it's, if this all goes through with the actual mechanics of moving and installing, rails for the compactors and things like that. Damon is very well versed in NSF stuff. Yes, we are exploring every single avenue of funding. But that said, UNC cannot simply tomorrow accept 800,000 specimens. There has to be infrastructure, and I'm talking about money. So yes, everyone has good intentions, but yeah, and it's going to take some time, as Blanka has said. All these, you know, we can't take 800,000 specimens tomorrow, and we don't want people just to assume that the fairy godmother will fly in and make it all happen. It's a lot of hard work and hard negotiations ahead.
Can I add something to this? If you look at the Duke Herbarium website, there is a page where we sum up the support that NS National Science Foundation gave directly to Duke Herbarium, not to the labs who do research, but to the, you know, collection improvement grants and databasing grants. We received a humongous amount of money, and so I think NSF is really upset about this decision, because, right, we accepted very large overhead and it's not enough to do. So asking money to give us yet more, it's also a sensitive topic.
Well, thank you all for updating us on that. A slight change, we've got Eric LoPresti. I have his slides. Let me share my screen. Thank you, Blanka. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Carolyn.
Well, mine will be hopefully slightly more upwards than. Really positive, but.
And if you just holler, yeah. Oh, I thought convert it to, no, let's PowerPoint.
Okay, so today I'll talk about sort of entomology, and I should note that I'm I guess on the board of the South Carolina Entomological Society as well. And however, I come from kind of a botanical background. And I think, well, I'll get to it a little bit, but I think that some of these same issues that we just heard about are also going on in entomology. And, you know, as everyone in this room knows, that these collections have never sort of been more important. So who on earth am I? I got to South Carolina 2 years ago, starting my third year. I've always worked kind of at that interface between plants and insects. So I studied ferns and, well, more mostly the caterpillars that feed on ferns. And then I spent a couple of years down in South America before I went to grad school. And I was working on birds, but I was mostly collecting butterflies and dragonflies and sending them back to collections here. My PhD was in the entomology department at Davis, but I worked on plants. And then I was a plant ecologist in the plant bio department at Oklahoma State before I came here. So they hired me as an experimental community ecologist. I'm about as knowledgeable about what that means as you guys might be. But you know, at heart, I am just sort of a natural historian and have been working on various plant insect issues. And this is, if you guys haven't read this paper, it came out in 2013 or 2014. Josh Tewksbury was the head of the Nature Conservancy at that point, I believe. Now he's at STRI. And this was sort of this is kind of an optimistic sounding title. However, I think if you go down to the next slide, basically, what he did was he gathered data on natural history education and natural history collections. And he didn't do entomology, but he did herbaria, and herbaria, the number of herbaria peaked in the 1980s and has declined very sharply ever since. And obviously, as we just heard, is continuing to decline. And this is also mirroring the fact that we're giving out fewer PhDs in organismal and natural history disciplines. And that back in the 50s, universities were requiring, you know, 2, 3, 4 natural history and organismal courses for their graduates. And now Herrick and I, unfortunately, cannot do all of the natural history teaching at USC. And you can sneak through a biology degree at USC without getting any real natural history training whatsoever. And so, you know, in entomology, we haven't had a collection like Duke, you know, one of the 10 biggest collections in the country, shut down. But we are also facing the same sort of issue where collections are being consolidated, new collections are now being started. Collecting itself has slowed a great deal. And so we have less sort of knowledge of what's going on. Yeah, so the collection that I'm sort of, I guess, de facto in charge of now is this fantastic moth and butterfly collection that was taken by this sort of eccentric, obsessive millionaire in Charleston County in the 1960s and the early 1970s. And unlike most sort of collectors who go kind of everywhere to collect everything, he just really wanted to document what was on his property in the Santee Delta. And so he hired a full-time assistant from the Charleston Museum. He collected every night. He converted one of his like outbuildings on his estate into a laboratory, another outbuilding into a gigantic moth trap with like banks of light inside and shutters that opened at dusk and closed at dawn so he could walk in every morning and pick up his moths. He hired like the top entomologists at Cornell, at Yale, at the Smithsonian, at the American Museum to come down and collect and also to curate this collection. And when I was hired, no one told me about this. Our facilities manager sort of was like, "Oh, do you want to see the moths?" Well, you know, once I was moved in, well, what moths? And she brought me over. We've got about 300 drawers. We think around 30,000 specimens. And there's like, sort of some of the most beautiful life history specimens that I've ever seen in any museum. There's other things like this moth that hasn't really been seen since. He discovered about between 25 and 30. Oh, sorry. He discovered like between 25 and 30 new species during this effort as well. And just prepared this wonderful single site collection, probably one of the best single site collections anywhere in the country. And it happened to be there. He also did some collecting, mostly of the caterpillar food plants. And Herrick has those specimens now, but it's a fairly limited number as well. Last year, we started resampling the area. So he sampled from his retirement in 65 to when he passed away in 76. And in just a year or so of sampling, we've got a whole bunch of new species, including a whole bunch of new state records for South Carolina. This is a state record, this is a state record, this is a state record. I think we got about a dozen new state records last year. And some things, this is a species you'll see all over Columbia and everywhere. It's an invasive, was introduced in 79. Of course, he didn't collect it. Other stuff are things that have moved north since and were previously known from Florida and Georgia and may have been documented in South Carolina starting in the 90s. Some of them were documented starting last year. And so we are able to sort of use this historical collection to document the changes that have occurred in the last 50 years. And the biggest result, and this was done by an undergrad in the lab, Alley, the biggest result is that while they're flying earlier, they're flying later. So the flight season, which is kind of when the adult moths are out, are getting longer. And we think this is probably due to the number of freezing nights in Charleston County going from an average of around 40 in the 1960s to an average around 20 in the last decade. The highest number in the last 50 years was in 1968. There were 68 days of frost. Last year, there were 9. So we think that a lot of these things, and some of these are now flying, really late into the fall. They're adding an extra generation where they didn't used to. And so having this historic collection there and having those dates of collection and the species is really invaluable. And I can talk more about this if you have questions. So I don't know, I don't have an answer to this, but I do think there's a lot of really good people. The Clemson Entomology Museum is awesome. The 2 mics that run it are fantastic. And, there is a push for integrative research. NSF just put out sort of a call to one of their dear colleague letters for innovative use of collections, including synthesizing information from disparate collections. And there are people that are doing really cool research looking at entomological phenomena on herbarium sheets, something like the amount of insect feeding damage on herbarium sheets over time, and as well as many other interesting things. And I think that I speak for more than just myself in South Carolina in saying that the entomologists would be really excited to also integrate with some of this herbarium data, because that link between plants and insects is so strong. And if anyone has feedback or ideas on how to integrate entomological and herbarium collections together, I'm all ears, and I'm sure everyone else would be as well.
Is the place where he collected still is it still there, and does he have rich relatives? We're still interested in moths.
Great question. His son actually,
haven't thought about
his son has a PhD in insect physiology, actually. And I've talked to him a little bit. Unfortunately, USC actually owned his estate until about 3 months before I started my job. And they ran it as a mosquito lab throughout the 80s and 90s, and then they lost their NIH funding. So now it's just a stone's throw away from Santee Coastal Reserve. which is a huge, I guess, 26,000 acre property, and then the Santee Delta, which is another 8 or 10,000 acres, kind of on the other side of it. So we've been using the DNR properties to recensus, and it's contiguous upland pine forest and then contiguous marshland. So I think we're sampling the same populations, but we don't have that exact, we have access to 35,000 acres and he had 400 acres right in the middle of that. So I think we're sampling the same populations, but unfortunately I don't have access to the same spot.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. So we have Dr. Czakó talking about DNA and the herbarium, and here's the clicker. It should work.
Good morning. My name is Mihaly Czakó. I'm at the biology department here at USC, and I'm a user of the herbarium, this herbarium and some other herbaria. And then in particular, I use the DNA that's contained in these natural history specimens. So I would like to talk about this aspect of herbarium natural history collections a little bit in general terms. So the herbaria hold more than just the dried plant specimen. So what is the herbaria holding? Those are repositories of dried plant specimens, and that collection dates back sometimes for hundreds of years, approximately to the 1600s. And then there is a great potential in these collections beyond the biological specimen and the morphology of it and the species identity, because it contains more information beyond what is readable from the phenotype. So there is information on ecological, environmental change, evolutionary change, and changes in biodiversity in that. And then how many of these collections exist? So there is an estimate that within the over 3,000 herbarium collections in the world, there is over 390 million such herbarium collections. And now we hear that there are and we know rapid advances are taking place in cataloging these, not the cataloging, but the digitization of the specimen itself, imaging, and also the records themselves. So the records are becoming, the information is becoming more accessible, and then it is making the possible the realization of the potential in these collections. So the herbarium specimen, and it's not limited to the herbarium because it is applicable to the entomological collection as well, and other natural history collections. There is a time capsule of information there, because one can read evolutionary, environmental, and biodiversity changes from that. So, and it goes back, because of the time frame involved here, back to the beginning of industrialization and colonization. So some of the things can be easily read from just the specimen itself, the phenology or the species identity, and you don't need to destroy things. But here now that comes this definition of destructive sampling, because to get to the DNA, which also holds information on these changes, requires a little bit of destruction, but not the whole specimen. So the molecular analysis under which DNA falls is you have to get to the DNA, but the molecular analysis is not limited to just DNA, other nucleic acids, and metabolites and pollutants are also possible to analyze. So it is possible to get DNA out of herbarium specimens, although they are dried and it's well known. I just covered this in general detail. There is some destructive sampling involved, and then there is homogenization and extraction. And without PCR amplification, one can sequence part or all of the DNA sequence and read that out and do hypothesis-driven experimentation with that data. So destructive sampling by definition is a procedure that permanently alters that specimen, that collection. And it can be involve removing parts of it, something that was broken loose, and then the change that it is ever so rarely, you know, it's a part of the definition that it can involve the entire specimen, but you don't hear that. That happens very rarely. So the changes are irreversible, of course, but often invisible. And now, how do we remove that? So it's not just willy-nilly, but there should be an agreement on what is reasonable to remove for that type of sampling in case it's for DNA. And then it has to be guided by good herbarium practices. We don't want to impact the usefulness of this specimen, so we don't want to remove an essential part of it. But then there's it unrecognizable, and then it is often from actually the fragment pouch. So that's just a small detail there, that there is a fragment pouch on specimens where things are stored that did not get mounted. So in a little bit more about this now, about the homogenization, the extraction part. So DNA is just DNA, biochemists say, and you know you can read that information and handle that information. But when it comes to plant DNA, and I can't speak for most of the other organisms, but the plant material might be hard to homogenize because it's heterogeneous, not to mention hard, but or fluffy. And then there are secondary metabolites which are well known in plants, highly diverse, that can make individual species more difficult to extract DNA from than the others, because those metabolites can do almost anything to DNA, including chemical modifying it or just sticking to it. And even the impurities can hinder the further processing of the DNA. So there is information out there for particular texts that have been sampled before, but one might have to, work out some problems with the purification. And then you get to the sequencing part, and the sequencing part I don't want to detail very much, but one can do it with or without amplification, and then sequence the entire genome or just part of it. And then that DNA information can be used for hypothesis-driven research. So back to the DNA, what happens to DNA in a biological specimen? So it can be degrading, and then how long does it last? Good news, it lasts for as long as 2 million years. It's a recent publication that they found DNA from animal and plant things as old as 2 million years, highly fragmented DNA in an ecosystem, and they were able to read information about it. But DNA does bring down in exposure to the heat, so certainly the drying of the specimen is affecting it, and it also altered by natural enzymes released from the plant itself or by microbes that come around and just spontaneous reaction. So back to the fragment package, we don't necessarily have to destructively sample a part of the specimen, because fragments don't get mounted, and you have this paper, archival quality paper, plastic into which you collect the parts that did not get mounted, or they break loose during handling. So it's not a standard practice in every herbaria to have a fragment pouch affixed to the sheet as on a regular basis, but it might be a good idea because fragments become loose, break off even later, and then what are you going to do with it? Oops, it's broken, and not everybody has this presence of mind to save that. But if the pouch is there, then it might be saved there, and then that would be an excellent starting material for sampling, including for DNA. So not all DNA has to be taken from an established specimen because we do collections in the field because of our biological projects there. And then, for example, sampling of vegetation or flora and biodiversity. And then as a matter of fact, as a matter of the procedure, it's a good idea to because it make a collection and even collect extra fresh, extra tender material to be saved in the fragment pouch for future DNA analysis. For example, then particular application of the DNA here is the some plants are harder to identify in the field because they are harder to reach or not. The reproductive parts are harder to reach. And then, for example, such a thing as PCR exome DNA barcoding can aid the identification of species or surveying the flora somewhere. So all this information, this is where I would like to conclude very soon. But this slide, is this supposed to be a video?
I don't think it's playing.
Okay.
But we are short on
So
time.
anyway, trying to get to it, okay, so there is an effort in trying to get to that plant specimen or the DNA contained within, but oh
Okay.
yeah, it is actually playing, okay, so,
Okay.
well, it's fun. And here's the case of an oak in a heritage place. And it is reserved, and we needed a fragment, even though it was a dead leaf. So and there is an outcome of it. So all this that is done in herbaria based material is not necessarily staying just on, in the pots, but an example, undergraduate students were involved in research. And then here at USC, for example, we had, I called Discover USC showcases, research, scholarship, leadership, and creative projects for undergraduate and graduate students. And there is an event where, for example, research project, part of it was showcased at the USC Discover event in 2023 April. So the point of this talk was that there is more in herbaria than what is represented by the outward appearance of a plant specimen, natural history specimen. And then with the advancement of the digitization and the records and the specimen and the associated data that we collect about plants, the herbaria may, develop or realize their potential. Thank you.
Any questions before we move on?
Is there a particular sort of tissue that is more optimum for extraction in DNA, like reproductive structures versus just vegetative material or?
So the still growing parts. So a tender shooting is a good idea to have. And it's not just for the DNA, because even for the identification of the species, it's a good idea to have in a collection to collect the growing shooting, because the juvenile parts are also of distinctive phenotype, but definitely the tender parts.
All right, we're gonna move on to Maura Flannery for Art in the Herbarium.
I am painfully aware that lunch is next. So I will make this as short as I possibly can. However, I do think this is important because I think that by linking herbaria to the larger cultural
the larger culture is very important as a way of getting people to know about herbaria and also getting people to love herbaria. And I'm a biologist. I'm not a botanist. I got interested in herbaria about 15 years ago, and I literally fell in love with them. But my teaching career was teaching non-science majors. So I had to find ways to connect them. And like I taught a course for criminal justice majors, biology and criminal justice majors. So I had to be creative. Well, my husband was an art historian, so that got me interested in art. And when I got interested in art, that sort of slowly brought me into botany, botanical illustration, etc. And so this is going to be just a slideshow. Okay. And the first is sort of, this is true art in herbarium. This is an herbarium specimen from about 1595. And it's obviously a bound herbarium that was done by a Johannes Harder, whose father did, there are a dozen of the fathers, and all of them have painting embellishments of various kinds. Here the root, obviously the pea pod, and filling in, so that, and filling in, you know, pieces of the leaves that disappeared. And so this is sort of an extreme case. This I see as an experiment among many that were done early in the history of herbaria. And this experiment didn't stick. Okay, but it is fascinating. This is more the way you see art in herbaria. This is from the Oak Ames Orchid Collection at Harvard, and his wife was a very talented artist, and she did portraits of people, but she did all his plant, and he did a lot of publication, so she did all his plant illustrations. But she is not one of those wives who got sort of lost. And we don't know, you know, really was she the one who did them and so, because she signed, every one of these has her signature on it. That we're not gonna forget her. And Blanka James. So I find that a very romantic kind of specimen. This is a case where, this is from the Sloan Herbarium. This is one of the specimens that Sloan got when he was in Jamaica. Sloan was wealthy, and he had an artist, a botanical artist, do illustrations, and these illustrations were then used to make engravings for his book on the natural history of Jamaica. And there's a whole thing which I don't have time to go into about how valuable, no way of preserving a plant is going to keep all of the features. And the art has some that the plant, the dry plant itself doesn't have. And having them together is very useful. This is considered now sort of bad because the plant material can affect the paper. But that's a whole other issue. This is a specimen from, now all the rest are from the AC Moore herbarium. And this is a very tiny, this is what you usually see in terms of art, or very often. Sometimes there will be prints or watercolors like in the Ames. But this is usually what you see, little magnifications of this grass that Henry Ravenel did. And there's very few that have an else collection like that, but it's of the, and his, initials are on it, so he did it. But then I have a few others, because I see art as broader than just the botanical illustrations. That in herbarium, this is one of the things that got me hooked on herbarium. There's so many of the specimens are so beautiful. And I'll also, before I leave the art, this is in the collection of the A.C. Moore herbarium. It is a collection of original drawings that were done by Keely Jackson for a flora of the plants of the A.C. Moore garden at the university. So this is another, there's a lot of herbaria have art. In many cases, it's been moved to the library, if it's a botanic garden or the library, but this is not an uncommon thing. This is an herbarium specimen that it was a juniper, and there were a lot of baby junipers around it, which the collector, it's John Nelson. And then I don't know who, it may have been John that mounted it, because he does mount many of his own specimens. But that is things like that. When you come upon them in your garden, they really are a kick. This is a person who was a student, Daniel Flisher, who was a student and then went on to do collecting. And this is one of his early specimens, but he continued to use this calligraphy. And this really looks like a 19th century. It's got the data that you are more likely to find on a 20th century specimen, but this is my last. Okay, I thought this is a brand new specimen. It was collected by Sean, but with two other people. Eric being one of them. And I don't know who mounted it. Okay, but sometimes, and there are other, I collect examples of herbarium specimens that are interesting for some reason. I've got a whole slew, not a whole slew, but I have a number of these. Because this happens every once in a while. Sometimes people get bored. And decide to, but anyway, this is, so that's it. And this is me. If you need any more trivial information, my email, and I have a blog called Herbarium. So thank you very much. In a plug. This is very much related to history. And to me, this is another culturally important thing about, and A.C. Moore has been very much involved in this with the Ravenel, the plants and planter site, and also with a number of you other, I don't want to be too chauvinistic. A number of other South Carolina institutions were involved as well. And also, there's been a Catesby project at the university that involved the library and the Kissick. This is really where, and this to me is the way herbaria are going to get noticed outside the herbarium. Thank you very much.
One thing, okay.
One of the things I think is really interesting, it fits into that, is early publications would have color plates in them because the camera hadn't been invented yet. And so some of my azalea specimens, I get the idea of what the flower color really was from looking at the original publications of that artwork in there. So incredible way of pulling all that stuff together, the history, the art, and the herbarium specimen all come together, each providing that
That's-
bit of
yeah,
information.
Those things enrich the knowledge of the plants. And there are, works of art, Linnaeus, a number of, where, a work of art is the type specimen. That is no longer allowed. Except in very small amounts.
One thing I would like to add, because I know we're all hungry, this is another opportunity to bring students into your herbarium. You can ask Mihaly and Herrick about it, but they did have an art student, an artist who came and worked in the herbarium, and then she told her friends in the program, and they came by for tours. So this is another way to engage other departments with your herbaria.
It also, there was an art professor who brought her students over.
That's what I was gonna say. I was actually auditing an art professor's class. It was, museums are not neutral. So it was about the colonial history behind museums. And she had her class come over to our herbarium because she wanted them, she was art history, but she wanted them to see a natural history collection. And that was really cool because they have a very different perspective on the specimens, right?
I also like this, Carol Ann from UNC, I also like to put artists to work. The Botanical Garden has a wonderful botanical illustration certificate program. And sometimes when invited, I go down to the top art area. Sometimes artists come up, they wanna, use an herbarium specimen to get the hairs or the whatever, right, which is great. And then they're like, oh, and for my capstone project, I wanna, I really wanna illustrate Venus flytrap. And I tell them, we really don't need another illustration. Sorry, first bubble. But we have two scientists here who are describing brand new species, and they would love to have wonderful pen and ink drawings, just, with scale bars and everything of the A keys or of the whatever to include in the publication. And this is a chance for you to illustrate a plant that is new to science and you could get published. And occasionally they take me up on it. So it's a way for the artist to publish and for the botanists to get high quality illustrations for papers. Put those artists to work.
Didn't you do that article
Well,
yourself for
thank-
wildlife on hate speak? Here's some of those. This-
So the food is coming, for everybody who's joining us virtually, we will be back on at 1:10 PM. So we are going to turn, this Zoom link off and you're gonna join the afternoon session at 1:10 PM. So thank you all for joining us virtually and we hope to see you back in the afternoon.
Some of those icons will work.
So we can take students to the herbarium as a tour, like what we will see this afternoon.
Yeah.
Is it possible